everyone. It is time for the XP Billionaires podcast. As long as they keep releasing RPGs, we'll keep having something to talk about. I am Rafe Thegrim. I am your host, and I am joined by Sky Knight and Irene Rogue today. So, Sky, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm pretty good, pretty good.
Awesome. And Irene, how about you?
I'm pretty good.
All right, pretty good all around. I can't argue with that. It's actually better than the last couple of weeks. So, I mean, I'll take it.
Yeah, to say the least.
All right. Well, without further ado, yeah, let's just get right into it this week. We got an interesting discussion for you guys this week. So, RPG writers have two ways to tell their stories. They can follow the path of series like Final Fantasy or the Tales games and create a new world with each mainline entry. Conversely, they can create a much larger story in a much larger world, like the Suikoden or the Legend of Heroes Trails series. I call these one world and multi world series. And while both methods are successful and neither is wrong in any way, shape, or form, I guess the question is one better than the other? And I'm wondering if we're going to be able to shed some light on this situation. So I know we play RPGs regardless of their world building methods, but does anybody here actually have a preference of which style? If so, what do you think makes one the other? What makes it so successful? Irene, well, you weren't with us last week, so why don't you start us off?
Well, based on some of the discussions we've had previously and what I know about both of your tastes in gaming, I think I might be the exception in the room, as that I don't necessarily have a preference in terms of like world building style, so long as it's done correctly. So take the Tales series, for example, because you mentioned them specifically, and because I'm very familiar with them. Because they've done both, and they've done them both extremely well, and also done, a couple of them extremely poorly. Most games are independent of each other, and they do an excellent job at world building. In fact, the state of the world, its politics, and major players are usually front and center in the story of the games, which I think really helps make world building successful because it actually draws the player in to some of the key conflicts that are going on, not only on an individual scale, but like on a more, holistic scale. But I want to draw attention specifically to Zestiria and Berseria, where the latter was a prequel. Again, they made sure to center the world in the story, and they successfully were able to tie both narratives together. So that doesn't mean I don't appreciate stuff like the Mass Effect trilogy and Dragon Age for their like single setting across multiple games, but like I don't necessarily think a single entry world is doesn't do it for me just because it's like not across multiple games. It doesn't change as you grow. Like I really like the world building they did in like Horizon, for example, and it's a standalone title for now. I don't know if they were teasing at a sequel or not, but my point is, so long as that it's done well and solidly and thoughtfully, I'm not necessarily fussed about what style or goal they decided to go with.
Oh, absolutely. And when it comes to games that want to do a prequel or just a singular sequel to it, that's not bad either. Like when I think about a multi-world series, I think about something that's got five or more games in its series where they're using that same world. Um, like obviously I prefer the one world series a lot more. I mean, for me, it drives hype. Like with a multi-world series, I can get excited when a new entry comes out. That's not a problem. And definitely going to look forward to it. But when a new entry in a one world series when it comes out, it gives me that different feeling. It's a feeling of why is this not in my fucking hands right fucking now? Like, it's a subtle but stronger desire. I've usually been stuck with a cliffhanger ending from the last entry or left with unanswered questions that all I can do is hope for that subsequent entry answers. And God forbid, if, there's still unanswered questions in games like the Suikoden series, if it got the axe and we never got those answers, yes, I'd be devastated. But it's still something I'll always look forward to, and I'll always have speculation. I'll always have fan theories. I'll always have all these things to look at. And that's what really drives me a lot more with a one world. With a multi-world series, that one game, more often than not, unless it decides to do a sequel or a small prequel, it usually wraps up all of its story in a nice little package. I don't know. Like once it does that, then I'm like, okay, I'm happy. I've been through that. I've seen this world. Now we'll see whether they want to do another one in a different world and kind of see where it goes from there.
I get it. It's just I don't know. It's more for me. It's more like the quality of the world building because you can get some pretty shoddy world building in a 3 entry series of a game. Final Fantasy 13. Your world building was terrible. Go think about what you did.
I mean, that's fair, but I will still say that Lightning Returns was the best game in that trilogy, hands down.
That
I don't care
that's
what anyone
fair.
says.
They threw out their entire world building and built a new world for that. I'm just gonna say that right now. They basically threw out
No,
everything else from the first two games.
I mean, in a way, yes, but if you think about it, and this is something that I think they finally realized they didn't have anything to go with. So the storyline with Lightning Returns was that it's the end of this world. We can't do anything more with this, so we're just going to end it, and we're going to make sure it's a full-on doomsday clock.
Good. Die. Save no one.
Oh,
Wow.
I did save a lot of people, but still, I mean, if you think about that, I think that might have been just this little subtle hint. It's like we realize we screwed up, so this is the third game where we scrap everything.
Yeah, like I've said before in the past, in the first entry in the series where they revealed the big bad and everyone was like gasping like it was the end of the world. I had no fucking clue what was going on because they had hidden all the explanations in the data logs instead of actually, building the world for the player. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. You have to build your world. You can't just lazily stuff it in text entries and hope that people will read it. Especially in an RPG, like it's important.
Sky, do you have anything to add?
Not on that particular topic, no. As for my actual answer to the question,
Yes.
I mean, the One World series is my preference without question. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean I don't like one-shot games or series with multiple worlds. Those are fine too. But really, when I think about the games that I love the most, it's several games that all take place in the same world. Because there's so much more meat to it. I live for a story that's meaty and full of lore, and really, I want more usually than you can pack into a singular title.
Well, that's exactly it. Like I can't, like I was saying before, I can't get over when I finish any one of the Trails of Cold Steel games. Even after finishing two, there were still questions that needed to be answered, even with a time jump of 2 to 3 years into Trails of Cold Steel 3. And then that one leaves me on yet even another cliffhanger, even though it's answered a few of those questions from the previous game. Like there's still so much that the last game has to do to tie up all these loose ends. And again, it's what gets me excited.
Yeah. And there's so much more potential to make the world seem really alive by having the time and space to flesh out the details. And you often have far less of that with a one-shot sort of title. This way, you can give everything the time and space and development it deserves. Assuming you don't get canceled by a publisher, there's that problem, but
Konami.
yeah.
Yeah, based on the way they are now, it's like, it may not be the worst thing that ever happened. It sucks, but like,
Well, companies change, so maybe someday, but I can't even begin to get my hopes up anymore for Suikoden.
Yeah, yeah, no, not at all. All right, well, before we become too depressed, let's move on. So yeah, so like out of these two styles, like which do you guys think would be more difficult to do?
So, which one is the more difficult? I would say continuous for obvious reasons. Consistency is hard. Final Fantasy 13. Also, if you do things like, The Witcher and Dragon Age, players dictate major changes in the world state, which means accounting for a lot of more possibilities. You can't get away with lazy world building in a multi entry series. Not that any of the games I've brought up so far fall into that category, but the more you stretch the world, the holes get bigger and more glaring, and you can't just wallpaper over it as easily. Also, you run into issues with the ending if you don't stick the landing. You could have just spent hundreds of hours leading up to that final moment, and then, well, things kind of don't work out. Incidentally, for anybody who is thinking this, I actually did not mind the ending of Mass Effect 3, so if you're mad, go get a cape so you can be super mad.
Womp womp.
I saw that on a meme, and I'm like, it's my new favorite thing.
Fair enough.
Well, I mean, I've got this weird feeling we're all going to agree about the One World Series, and like I agree when it comes to the consistency, like for and continuity. Multi-world series need to be careful with this kind of thing too, especially if they're considering even if especially when they're considering a prequel. So that's a big one there. But one slip up in a story's continuity, and somebody is going to find it. Like I think back to some of the 1990s sitcoms on ABC and shit, where they would just add, remove, or even age up characters for no real reason except that it fit the current script. Like for example, Family Matters. Steve Urkel, for example, was the Winslow family actually had two daughters in the first couple of seasons, and then one just vanished, no explanation given, and the series just continued on like she was never there. You can't do that without people noticing. And I don't know how the 90s got away with it so often. Like even Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, for one of the seasons, they aged up the baby by like 3 years just cause. And I mean, at least they kind of broke the fourth wall and made a joke about it. But it's what they did, and that you can't do that.
Why do you think so many 90s sitcoms and animated TV shows were so obsessed with nothing changing by the end of the episode? Where it was actually an event when there was a permanent world state change to like the actual like the world, like Maud Flanders dying. That was huge because like there was a character who was gone now. And that's something that was never really attempted in The Simpsons. Everything always went right back to the way it was. And that's also
Yeah,
a danger of like multi-state of multi-entry like world building games. Like you want your world to change and evolve over time, but it's risky because you could create yourself a nice little plot hole or paint yourself into a corner. All those things, right? If you always bring yourself back to the status quo by the end of the story and everything went back to normal, it's like, okay, cool, there was no stakes here. And it sort of turns the game from something meaningful into junk food.
yeah, no, you're right. Like I think one of the successful points where they made massive changes into a game was Final Fantasy VI. Transitioning into the second half of the game, and even your victory at the end of the game still didn't feel like a victory, but you knew that this is the world you had to live in now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, you want there to be stakes, you want there to be changes, but you also don't want there to be, like, such massive changes that you end up going down the wrong path.
Yeah, because you don't want to end up doing retconning because then you'll get criticized for that. So
For retconning, yep.
even when it's for the greater good. So
It's like you've retconned because you didn't know what to do with your plot. Haha. It's like, no, it just we knew what to do with the plot. It just looked like a retcon to the rest of you. You know?
Well, and sometimes things look like a retcon when they don't end up being in the long run.
Exactly.
People aren't patient though, that's the thing. So I guess I'll get into it here. I mean, obviously I'm along the same lines as you two are. Like the One World Series is the more difficult one to do. Mostly because I don't know, competent writers seem to be few and far between somehow. And maybe I could go on a rant about English education, literary education here, but I will refrain for time and energy's sake. But you gotta keep track of the details. It takes time, it takes care, it takes energy, but it's not impossible. And for some reason, people seem to think that these things don't matter for video games. Now, it's gotten way better over the years. But a lot of companies would still just rather reset everything, at the end of a title, or just completely make something new for the next title in their series. Despite the fact that they could be using the energy that they use reinventing the wheel with each entry to focus on the story.
Yeah, it depends on the company a little bit, I think. Because like some companies have the clout and the commitment to go
And
in and tell a
talent.
new and the talent to tell a new story each time, to put that dedication into the world building in order to like polish it properly, while others not so much. It really depends on the property, it depends on the publisher, it depends on the developer, right? It's not something that
Mm.
every developer is super capable of.
And honestly, I think that's a problem. Because if you're gonna, and I'll try not to segue into a video games as art argument here, but really, if you're gonna create meaningful stories, then you need to have competent writers.
Hey,
It also helps your games age better over time, because regardless of how pretty it is or how nice the game, good the gameplay is, at any point in its history, the story remains. That doesn't degrade over time.
the quality of
The
the
sa-
storytelling should stand by itself. Now, the relevance of the story could become less relevant over time depending on, how they center the topic. But, truly great storytelling, I think, it's the themes are somewhat timeless even if the story like is very different.
and no story is ever irrelevant. Like it's at very least a reflection of the time in which it was written, and that is never irrelevant, even if it's not, even if you can't transpose it to the modern day.
Yeah, not right away, not super directly. Doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily mean that there's nothing you can take away from it.
exactly. um So I think in that case, this is why I sort of go for the One World Series, because like in a lot of cases, you get you can really get a more you know unique, detailed world, and that simply can't. That is too big for a single project. But I like very original, very ambitious work typically. So, I mean, that may be my bias coming through, but there it is.
But I mean, it's what you enjoy. And that's what matters to you. So regardless of whether or not there's a bias behind it, I mean, the facts speak for themselves. You're right. If it's not written well, it's gonna have a problem, especially if you're planning to do a one world series of, five or more games.
Well, and the fact of the matter is, if a one world series is written incompetent, bleh. If a one world series is terribly written, it's not going to get far. They'll just drop it. So
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But all right, so we've talked a lot about the One World Series. So I did try to put some love in here for multi-world series. So let's get into that. Um, so the multi-world series will often not only change their world with every installment, but make changes to the game's mechanics in order to set itself apart from its predecessors. So, what do you guys feel are some of the core elements that need to stay in a multi-world series for it to be considered part of said series?
So usually for me, it's like your basic play style is a good idea to keep simply because overhauling your entire mechanical system while overhauling your entire story and world is often a bad idea. Like we were just saying, some developers can manage it, but the safest thing to do is to improve upon a good foundation. So long as that good foundation exists, huge caveat. So add things like, cool super moves, combos, refine the combat and the mechanics to add complexity for veteran players, but not so much as to be alienating for new players. That's a difficult balance to strike, by the way. It's a very difficult balance to strike. And not all developers are, really capable of it. But if a studio has a history of quality games, I won't begrudge them trying something new mechanically, Yakuza 7, because it's switching from an actions game to a turn-based game. And, they have shown, studios that do Yakuza have shown that they pump out quality title after quality title, crafted with love and care and attention. So, I'm willing to give them the leeway to say, yeah, try something, new, try something different, try something fresh, and let's see how it works. They've earned some cash that they can spend there. You know?
they've earned our goodwill.
Exactly. They've earned, goodwill and and confidence, consumer confidence. So it's interesting to see what them try something different. I'll give an example for something that I'm a little bit more familiar with is FromSoft, right? So they switched over from their traditional Dark Souls formula with a more almost rhythm, realistic combat style with Sekiro, right? And as much as that game pissed me off because I couldn't fucking do it, I'm not going to begrudge it for being a bad experience, it's a quality game. It's an interesting combat mechanic. I just wish I was better at it, or they had difficulty sliders, and that's about it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't worth taking the time away to try something a little different for them, But on the other hand, some studios, Bethesda, don't even have a solid foundation to build on. Without that, you can't. Not only can you not continuously improve, Bethesda, you don't have the credibility to branch out with something entirely different. Bethesda.
Well,
God, your games are still so buggy, guys. And last year, the studio that did Fallout New Vegas came out with The Outer Worlds and basically showed the entire, gaming community that a small studio can do it so much better than you because they invested in the right place, i.e., quality story and quality testing, quality assurance, period.
Yeah, it helps.
It does. I feel it was a very bold move to beta test Fallout 76 with live customers. I'm not sure it's paid off for you.
A little
No.
bit.
And just to be clear, they didn't actually do that. I'm making fun of them. It just feels like that's what they did because the game is so broken.
And how? Yeah. Yeah, no, those all make a lot of good points. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's been, apart from, doing some of the superficial things like, keeping spell names like Final Fantasy does. I think it would be necessary to maintain a certain art style, in order to feel true to the series. Like visuals can get better with newer gen graphics, absolutely. But even so, I feel like you can maintain a similar aesthetic regardless. Tales has really done a good job of that over the years. Like I can go as far back as Tales of Destiny for the PS1 and still think give it like a bit of a visual feel like it belongs with the other series. The gameplay mechanics are the same as well, so that helps. But visually, even though it's fairly 2D graphics, it really sells that it started this series, and all the other games in the series have followed suit in that visual style. They just let it evolve over the years with the new graphics.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at it, Yakuza's done something very similar. You know,
Hmm.
like, yeah, yes, it's one World Series, but also it's maintained that visual aesthetic throughout.
Yeah, even with the remakes, and from what footage I've seen of the original games for the PS2, they felt right. They felt the same no matter what. I still have yet to play the originals. I want to get through the Kiryu series before I go back and play the other two all over again from the originals. I also have to get my hands on copies of those. But everything that I've seen says that this is the kind of game it was. And then when they remade it, they just made it look like the rest of the series when they remade them for PS4. Sky, what do you think?
I don't think necessarily that there's any one thing in specific that needs to be similar, but there has to be some sort of tether to previous entries that isn't, a shared history. It could be the similar gameplay mechanics, it could be story structure. We've seen stuff like that be done before. Or, as you mentioned, Rafe, naming conventions for like spells and ability names and whatnot. Or visual style, like you also said. There just has to be something that connects the entries to. I mean, the goal is you want people to come back to a series, so you have to make it identifiable somehow as a series, even if the entries are really completely standalone. And so long as you have that tether, people will keep coming back. So long as you don't, create a complete crap game or anything. So I think there are many ways to do it. You just have to do it somehow.
Yeah, yeah. There is no wrong way to connect your game with another in its series. You've just got to find it. You got to find the way that works best for your series.
Because if not, then what's the point in giving it the same name? It's not even remotely the same thing, right? And if you don't do it, people are going to play the new game in the series and feel betrayed because it doesn't feel like what they expect. And you still sometimes get that anyway. I mean, particularly when Final Fantasy pushes some kind of envelope. But, fandoms complain a lot. It's just what happens.
See, I don't necessarily mind when they try different things with their mechanics because again, the Final Fantasy series has earned, some cash, but like some
Well,
some pay for it, but like
that was like I'm not specifically dissing on Final Fantasy here,
oh, I
but
know. It just seems like they're like I can understand the criticism of like why is Square Enix suddenly allergic to the things that made it successful,
yeah.
which is a little strange, but also like I don't begrudge them trying some new shit now and then cuz like
No, you have to ride the balance between maintaining interest, as in not letting your series grow stale, but you also can't make each entry in your series so different that it alienates current fans.
yeah.
And any multi-world series has run into this issue at some point to some extent with someone. Like, you're not going to make everybody happy.
No, because then the question is like, did we manage to make enough like new fans to compensate for the loss of the old ones, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to be our discussion about one world and multi-world games. I hope it was enlightening for everybody, but I want to hear what you guys think about these different story styles. Which ones do you prefer? Which ones do you think are harder to make? Let me know. Come check me out on my social media. You can find me on Twitter at billionairesxp. You can find me on Instagram at Ray Fegram. And don't forget to check out my streams Wednesdays at 7 on Twitch, also at Ray Fegram. Sky, where can everyone find you?
I'm at SkyKnightXP on Twitter and Twitch, skyknight.xp on Instagram, and I stream on Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern.
And Irene, where can everyone find you?
I'm at irogue_XP on Twitter and Twitch. I normally stream on Thursday nights.
All right. And for our ever growing list of quickfire reviews, transcripts, and podcast and stream schedules, check us out on our website at xpbillionaires.wordpress.com. And always check out our monthly newsletters on our coffee page. That's coffee.com/xpbillionaires. All right. That's going to be it for us this week. And as long as there's a story to be told, there's an opportunity for you to keep gaming. So keep doing it. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.